Ghogiel, the shadow of wisdom. Integrated quality, chakma, wisdom, and intuition. Chakma, meaning wisdom, represents the first movement of conscious insight. It is the living spark of intuition before it becomes structured into understanding, where Bina receives and gives form to truth. Chakma is the sudden illumination through which truth first reveals itself. Wisdom cannot be manufactured. It cannot be forced. It arrives through openness, presence, and direct perception. It is the quiet recognition that appears before words, before concepts, before explanation. Chakma reminds us that reality is always greater than our understanding of it. Wisdom, therefore, remains humble. It continues listening, continues observing, continues learning. When Chakma is integrated, intuition and discernment work together. Insight becomes illumination rather than assumption. Wisdom remains rooted in truth rather than certainty. The shadow, Ghogiel, the shadow of wisdom. Within the symbolic framework of this book, Ghogiel represents the fragmentation of wisdom, where Chakma receives insight with humility. Ghogiel mistakes impulse, assumption, certainty, or imagination for genuine wisdom. The individual gradually becomes convinced they already know. Intuition becomes confused with projection. Confidence becomes confused with clarity. Inspiration becomes detached from discernment. The shadow is not intuition. Intuition is one of humanity's greatest capacities. The shadow arises when intuition becomes separated from humility. Insight is no longer questioned, it becomes unquestionable. The flash of wisdom becomes the illusion of complete understanding. Repression and suppression. When Ghogiel becomes repressed or suppressed, the individual gradually loses trust in their own intuition. Every insight is doubted, and their knowing is dismissed. Creativity becomes inhibited. The individual continually waits for external certainty before acting. Wisdom remains present, yet continually ignored. The voice of intuition becomes quieter, not because it has disappeared, but because it is no longer trusted. The individual begins believing that truth always belongs to someone else. Possession. When Ghogiel becomes possessed, the opposite occurs. Every impression becomes absolute truth. Every intuition becomes unquestionable certainty. The individual gradually loses discernment. They become convinced that every inner experience carries ultimate authority. Humility quietly disappears. Wisdom becomes performance. Certainty replaces inquiry. The individual no longer tests insight through experience, they immediately identify with it. The gift of intuition gradually becomes distorted into spiritual pride. Universal pattern. Ghogiel represents the archetypal fragmentation of wisdom. Consciousness forgets that insight must remain rooted in humility and begins identifying with inspiration itself. The spark becomes mistaken for the whole flame. Collective unconscious. Collectively, Ghogiel appears wherever societies dismiss intuition entirely or elevate charismatic certainty above careful discernment. Wisdom becomes replaced either by rigid skepticism or unquestioned conviction. Humanity gradually loses the balance between openness and discernment. Individual psyche. Within the individual, Ghogiel appears through self doubt, overthinking, impulsiveness, intellectual arrogance, spiritual superiority, projection, certainty, and the unconscious need either to distrust or glorify one's own intuition. The psyche gradually loses its capacity to distinguish genuine insight from personal preference. The world. In daily life, Ghogiel becomes visible through our actions. We ignore inner guidance because we fear being wrong. We make impulsive decisions believing every intuition must be followed immediately. We dismiss the wisdom of others. We assume insight without reflection. We become overly dependent upon external experts, or we refuse guidance altogether. Our behavior quietly reveals whether wisdom is being received or possessed. Reflection. Spend a few moments reflecting upon your relationship with wisdom. Ask yourself, which expression of Ghogiel has shaped my life more deeply? Repression or possession? Do I trust my intuition? Do I question it with humility? Where do I ignore my deepest knowing? Where do I mistake certainty for wisdom? What helps me distinguish intuition from impulse? Am I listening for truth or simply listening for confirmation? Recognition is the beginning of wisdom, for wisdom grows wherever humility and insight remain together.